Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and today I've got some thriller recommendations for you, and I have some goals with these recommendations. I really want to find you the next thriller that you're gonna love, and I want to tell you about thrillers that aren't already super hyped in the community. So I'm not going to tell you about authors like Riley Sager and Ruth Ware and Sherry Lapina and Lisa Jewell. I really enjoy most of those authors and their books, but I'm pretty sure you already know of them. You don't need them recommended to you. So I'm gonna bring you some underhyped thriller recommendations, explain why I like these books, why I think you will like these books, and hopefully you find your next favorite thriller, or at least a thriller to pick up that you end up enjoying that you might not have picked up otherwise. So let's go ahead and get started. I didn't really plan what order I'm gonna talk through these books, but I've got 8 books to talk about. The first one I'm gonna talk about is probably the most hyped book out of all of the ones I'm going to talk about. So this is as popular as it gets, but I'm going to recommend Verity by Colleen Hoover, and it's just because I can't not recommend this book. This is probably my favorite thriller of all time, partly because it's really great, but also partly I think because I read it early on in my thriller reading career, so it really impacted me strongly, and I just remember having such a strong visceral reaction to this book, to what happens in it and what happens at the end. Because it left such a strong impression, I just can't do a recommendations video without recommending this book. So what this is about, if you are not familiar, is about this writer named Lowen who gets approached one day with an opportunity to ghostwrite for a more popular author who is in an accident and who is no longer able to finish her own book series. So our main character goes to that author's house and lives there, and like goes through her office to try to find previous manuscripts or works in progress to build off of to finish the series. And she finds some things that the author had written that are disturbing, and it goes from there. Some people classify this as like a romance thriller because there's a little bit of a romance element. I definitely think that takes a backseat to the thriller portion. So if you've been hearing this book or seen it around and you haven't been sure if you should pick it up, I say give it a try. It really surprised me, and I still think about it all the time. So that is recommendation number 1. The next recommendation I have is by an author that I hear a lot about, but I almost never hear people talk about this book, and it's What Lies Between Us by John Marrs. I've actually never read any other John Marrs books. His most popular books are called like The Passengers, The One, and there might be 1 or 2 other ones that I'm forgetting right now. But this is one of his most recent releases, if not his most recent. This was published in 2020. I originally read this as a NetGalley arc, and then I loved it so much that I had to pick it up in physical form. This is about 2 women who live in the same house. One of the women is being held captive by the other one. And I think that's all you really need to know going into it. This book is really great at having like twist after twist, and like every chapter ends at a cliffhanger, so you just want to keep reading. So in that way, I think it's really surprising for readers. Like, it's impossible to see where the book is going because it keeps twisting on itself and revealing things throughout the whole book, so it would be impossible to predict everything. I find that really entertaining. I am a fan of like cliffhangers at the end of chapters to make you keep wanting to read. If that's not something you're into, then I guess a warning to steer clear of this one. But I don't know why I haven't heard more people talk about this. I just found it a lot of fun. It's somewhat of a domestic thriller, and I don't really like domestic thrillers typically, but this one was just different enough for me to enjoy it. So maybe if you have read other John Marrs books and enjoyed them and are looking for something else and haven't heard of this one or haven't heard buzz around this one, I would definitely still recommend picking it up because I found it a really strong and surprising thriller. The next one that I'm gonna recommend is The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris. This is about a Black woman who works at a publishing company, and she is the only Black person at the entire company until another Black woman is hired to work alongside her. And at first she's super excited because she thinks she'll have someone to bond with, to relate to, and just someone who, you know, gets her, but quickly realizes that things might not be what they seem. This other woman doesn't seem to be on the same page as our main character. First thing is, I really like reading books about the book and publishing industry. It's not an industry that I know really anything about, so I find it really interesting to read about book publishing, book editing, everything like that. I also really did like the Black woman perspective that we get in this book, because that's not a perspective we get often in books in general, but especially thrillers. We don't have a lot of Black main characters in thrillers. And while yes, just in general, it's nice to have that diversity, I also think in this book specifically, it works really nicely because it incorporates elements elements of Black culture. So again, it feels different from any other book I've read before, or any other thriller, because of those elements. So I definitely think this is a worthwhile read. The next book that I want to recommend was a surprise to me when I first read it. It's Too Good to Be True by Corolla Lovering. To be honest, when I first picked this book up, it was through Book of the Month. I just picked it up kind of on a whim. It was the only thriller choice that month, and so I was like, I might as well get it and read it, and it'll probably be a dud, but I might as well pick it up and give it a try because I'm a Book of the Month member. And I was pleasantly surprised. The synopsis of this is kind of your typical domestic thriller. We're following this woman who just got engaged to this man, and there are secrets in that relationship. That man was married before, so there's a previous wife that we're also kind of following and dealing with. And so it sounds like something that I would absolutely not be interested in. And so I was very surprised when I started reading this book, and I just couldn't stop. Something about it hooked me. There is another perspective that you also follow that I found really interesting. And obviously it all comes together at the end, how it's all related. And I wish I had more to say in regards to why I recommend this book and why it's such a good thriller, but I don't have the words. It's just one of those feelings, you know, when you start a book and you can't stop thinking about it until you finish it. That's how I felt when reading this one. And generally I've seen other overall positive reviews for this book too, so I don't think I'm alone, but I also haven't heard people like recommending this left and right. So I think it might have slipped under the radar a little bit, so I just want to shout it out and recommend it as a good, solid domestic thriller that's a little bit different if you're someone who sometimes gets bored with the standard domestic thrillers. The next book I'm going to recommend is probably the most polarizing out of all the books, and that's Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. This is a more popular book, especially because this was recently adapted into a Netflix series. I have not seen the series. Honestly, I don't really care to. I love the book enough that I kind of just want to preserve it and don't really care to watch the series, but I guess if you watched it and it was good, let me know. But this book, if you haven't heard of it, is about this woman who has a one-night stand with a man that she's never met before and expects to never meet again, and then she goes to work the next day and realizes that that man is her new boss. So that premise, again, is fairly stereotypical domestic thriller, but this goes in a wildly different place from that. All I will say about what differentiates this book is that it has to do with lucid dreaming, which is a concept I find really cool in general. And actually, when I first read like the very first page of this book, it references like things you do to test if you're sleeping, so that if you're trying to lucid dream, you know you're dreaming. It says, pinch myself and say I am awake once an hour. Look at my hands, count my fingers, look at clock or watch, look away, look back. Stay calm and focused, think of a door. Because I was fairly familiar with lucid dreaming before going into this book, I read that and I was like, I know what this is about, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So if that interests you at all, definitely recommend this. I will say that the twist and the ending of this book is very polarizing. It has one of those like last page twists that I absolutely love, even if it's something that doesn't necessarily make sense or isn't something I wanted or anything like that. I always just love a good shocking twist right at the end. This does that. I can't imagine you guessing what it is, but I also don't want to hype it up too much because I don't want you to try, to guess what it is before you get there. So pick it up. Be along for the ride. Don't hate me if you hate the ending, because a lot of people do, but I loved it. So it's one of my favorite thrillers and one I have to recommend. Okay, the next thriller that I have to recommend is one that I've never seen recommended anywhere before. It's called West of Sin by Wesley S. Lewis. And I was actually contacted directly by this author a couple of years ago, and he told me the synopsis of the book and said, hey, I'd be willing to, send you a copy in exchange for a review. So I said, sure. I took a chance on it. Wasn't necessarily expecting it to be anything great, but I ended up loving it. So this is a lot more of an action thriller, I would say, more than a mystery thriller. We are following a woman who is at a conference in Las Vegas with her company. Something happens when she's at that conference that sends her in the car driving away from there, trying to get away from the situation as fast as she can, and she stops at a gas station and interrupts a robbery at that gas station. So all of a sudden she's in the middle of this other situation, and it goes from there. It's just a non-stop absolute thriller. It takes all kinds of twists and turns. At the halfway point in the book, we were in a situation where I was like, this has to be the end. This feels like the climax. Like this feels like I don't know what is gonna come after this. And it just kept going. I would definitely recommend this to fans of Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, because I know that's a pretty popular book right now. And that is very action-packed, you know, a lot of shooting and car chases and running away and just high action. So if you liked how that made your heart race and maybe even want a little bit more of that action feeling, this is what I would recommend for you. And then the last two books that I have to recommend are young adult mystery thrillers, but please don't click away. I know that a lot of thriller lovers don't want to read young adult, and I'm with you most of the time. I also don't vibe with young adult thrillers, but these two I really think stand up against like adult mystery thrillers. I think they're worth the gamble. I think they're worth the read. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Ace of Spades by Verity Amide. This book, if you just need a one-sentence pitch, it is Gossip Girl meets Get Out, and that's definitely an accurate representation. This book follows two Black teenagers who go to this like private academy, and they are basically the only two Black kids in the whole school. They don't run in the same social circles necessarily, but the two of them start getting ominous messages from this anonymous person basically threatening them. They're kind of forced to work together to solve the mystery of who's doing that and figuring out, is it race related because they're the only ones getting the messages and they're the only Black kids in the school. I will say that my biggest problems with young adult thrillers typically are that they don't feel high stakes enough, because a lot of times teenagers aren't in like life or death situations, but this one felt high stakes to me, so I appreciated that. And I just thought it was a really interesting concept. Again, something that I haven't read 100 times over. So definitely worth a read, whether or not you typically read young adult thrillers. And then the last one I want to recommend is called Don't Breathe a Word by Jordan Taylor. And this is one of my favorite thrillers of all time, regardless of it being a young adult. This book follows two different timelines, two different people. One is present day, where we're following a girl who is at a boarding school, and she's selected to be part of a secret society within that school. And then we're also following someone attending this school like 50 or 60 years in the past, and she is selected to test out this boarding school's nuclear fallout shelter, which is definitely not something that I've read before in a thriller, so I thought it was really cool to read like a different take on the boarding school kind of trope. I again found this one to be high stakes, which I need in any thriller, but especially young adult. And this one, being set at a boarding school, also had the element of like these kids have more independence than a normal teenager would. Their parents aren't watching their every move, and we're also not questioning why their parents aren't watching every move, because they are at a boarding school. So I thought this was just super fun to read, super interesting. I liked the conclusion. I loved the cover. But even if you don't typically read young adult thrillers, please give this a try. I never hear anyone talk about it, and I would love to know if other people enjoy this one as much as I do. So that is it. Those are my 8 thriller recommendations. Again, I love a lot of other thrillers, but I feel like I hear them talked about all the time. So I hope that you got at least one recommendation here that you haven't heard of before, or that you weren't previously convinced to try. Let me know if that's the case. Let me know your thriller recommendations, because I'm always looking to read more, and maybe with these recommendations you can figure out my taste a little bit better, and maybe you've read a book that reminds you of one of the ones I recommended or something like that. Please let me know. But otherwise, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one.